Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. The topic is lèse-majesté in Japan, and I'm going to be discussing later an article that was published 19 years ago by Tony McNicol in the Japan Media Review titled Covering Japan's Royals. Now, lèse-majesté you may have heard probably in current day with respect to Thailand. In Thailand, it's a crime, according to Section 112 of the Thai Criminal Code, whereby it is illegal to defame, insult, or threaten the monarch of Thailand, whether that be currently the king, the queen, heir-apparent, heir-presumptive, or regent. This modern Thai lèse-majesté law has been on the statute books since 1908. So basically, lèse-majesté, or sometimes lèse-majesty, is an offense or defamation against the dignity of a ruling head of a state or of the state itself. So the English name for this crime is a modernized borrowing from the medieval French, where the phrase meant a crime against the crown. Now, lèse-majesté in Japan, in Japanese, it's fukei, was a special crime of defamation concerning the imperial family that was in effect between 1877 and 1947, mostly in militarized Japan. It's considered an act of disrespect against the imperial family and affiliated sites like imperial shrines and mausoleums. So it first appeared in 1877 in the draft of the Japanese Penal Code. And later it was stipulated into Articles 74 and 76 as one of the elements of the current Penal Code, Part 2, Chapter 1, under Crimes Against the Imperial Family, which came into effect, surprise, surprise, just like Thailand in 1908. So here the scope of the crime was extremely wide, and any actions considered the act to be disrespectful was enacted. Therefore, this law forced Japanese people to support the emperor, Hirohito, Shinto, in militaristic Japan during World War II. However, after World War II, in accordance with strong instructions of the Supreme Commander of Allied Powers, General MacArthur, and the spirit of the new Constitution, which respected the equality of individuals, quote, crimes against the imperial family, including lèse-majesté, were abolished in the 1947 revision of the Penal Code. Therefore, there is no lèse-majesté in the current law in Japan. During the Meiji and Taisho periods, the number of people who were suspected of lèse-majesté averaged less than 10 per year. But during World War II, the number increased dramatically. And from 1941 to 1943, the average annual number rose to nearly 160. Now, as I indicated, there is no current crime. It's not a lèse-majesté in Japan. It's not a crime in the current penal code. However, there is a form of enforcement from, I guess you would call it, the vigilante side of right-wing extremists. So this is what the following article is going to address. It was published in 2004 in the Japan Media Review. I have the links in the description below. They're from the archive because it's no longer online. So let me start. Japan Media Review, covering Japan's royals. The imperial family is in crisis, but that's often hard to tell from Japanese media reports on royalty. Conservative editorial policies, self-censorship, and the threat of right-wing intimidation prevent the media from opening a proper debate on the chrysanthemum throne's role in modern Japan. Many observers believe that the interest in the Japanese Imperial Household, Knicho, is at an all-time low. The emperor and his family are often compared to civil servants, and they are just about as glamorous, few in number, and entirely supported by the state. Generally, they're left to smile, wave, and cut ribbons without too much attention from the press or public. All the same, in recent months, the royal household has been getting a bit more publicity than it's used to, and unusually bad publicity at that. The popular Crown Princess Masako, under pressure to bear an heir to the chrysanthemum throne, reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown and wasn't seen in public for months until two brief appearances in September. The palace also released video of her playing happily with her only daughter, Princess Aiko. In May, her husband, Crown Princess Naruhito, stunned the press and public by using a routine press conference to allocate blame for his wife's illness and make a thinly veiled attack on Imperial Household Agency bureaucrats. The Japanese imperial family is undergoing a quiet crisis. In the short term, or in the long term, or in the short term, it seems likely that the rules will have to be changed to allow Princess Aiko to one day become empress. A long-term problem is that if not actively disliked, more and more the imperial family is simply ignored. Some commentators believe that public indifference to the imperial family is the result of its growing irrelevance to modern Japan. They say it needs to find a new role for itself before the Japanese public loses interest completely. Now, in other constitutional monarchies, one might expect that role to be discussed through the media. Or if the monarchy really is so irrelevant, questions about whether the royals are actually needed at all. But there is precious little sign of that. Instead, reports largely skim the surface of events, refusing to delve into more profound and troublesome issues. Take an article in the June 10th edition of the weekly Shukan Bunshin. The 5-page report promised to look, quote, behind the chrysanthemum curtain and listed, quote, 10 taboo topics of the imperial household, including, quote, what is the real cause of Princess Masako's illness? And, quote, what is the budget of the imperial palace? Even, quote, why doesn't the crown princess drive? And, quote, how good is Princess Masako at cooking? What was noticeable by their absence in the list, however, were the biggest taboos of all, namely any real criticism of the royal family or imperial family, or questioning of the role of the institution itself. Jun Kame, a writer and teacher who spent 21 years working for the Shukan Shincho tabloid weekly, points out that 60 or so years might have passed since people could be executed for criticizing the emperor. But old habits die hard. Quote, freedom of speech and expression are recognized, he says. But all the same, those unwritten rules are left over. Quote, not one reporter ever asked Emperor Hirohito about his responsibility for the war in Asia, potentially one of the great stories of the last half century, said David McNeil, Japan Focus. It is corporate censorship or self-censorship by the media, says Kenshi Asano, a professor of journalism and mass communications at Doishisha University in Kyoto. Along with the Yakuza organized crime networks, the imperial family is the big taboo subject for the Japanese media. Few journalists are brave enough to step out of line, he says. The top-ranking people in the press are mostly close to the LDP, the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Young journalists know also that if they write something to criticize the imperial system, they will lose their future. During his 22 years at Kyoto News, Asano doggedly refused to use special honorific terms, such as adding sama to the end of a royal's name or imperial subject's name. When he wrote about the members of the imperial family. Always my editors complained, you are against the Kyoto style book. And I told them, no, you're against the Constitution. His editors added the honorifics anyways. A further psychological constraint on those contemplating lèse-majesté is the threat of violence from right-wing groups. As long as you don't say anything to resist the system, it is calm and nothing happens, says Asano. But Japan's journalists know the stories of those who dare to break the unwritten rules. In June 2000, Yasunori Okadome, the editor of a now defunct weekly magazine, Uwasa no Shinso, received an unexpected visit from two members of a right-wing organization. After clubbing him over the head with a glass ashtray, they stabbed him for neglecting to use an honorific when referring to Princess Masako in an article. Asano compares the media in Japan with their counterparts in the UK. The UK's Guardian newspaper, a leading left-of-center daily, is openly anti-monarchy. In December 2000, the paper pinned its political colors to the mast, arguing in a leader that Queen Elizabeth's successor should be replaced with an elected head of state. Such an editorial stance is unimaginable in Japan, Asano says. Despite the self-imposed and external constraints, journalists left with a hot story burning a hole in their notebooks will often manage to get the news out. Stories that might cause problems for press club-affiliated publications reach the public through weekly magazines. Stories that no Japanese publication would touch sometimes break in the foreign press. It's an odd system, says Kame. It depends on the size of the story. The larger the story, the further it will travel. The media don't just pull punches. On occasion, they don't even bother stepping into the ring. Historic news stories concerning the imperial family have been completely ignored by the major Japanese news organizations, and their thousands of reporters have been repeatedly scooped by overseas publications in their own backyard. In 1993, the Washington Post showed up the Japanese media by breaking news of the engagement of Masako and Naruhito after it had been embargoed by the Imperial Household Agency. It happened again in the May of this year, only after the London Times revealed that Princess Masako was being treated for a mental breakdown did the story appear in the Japanese press. That's not to say Japanese journalists didn't know about it in the first place, explains Richard Lloyd Perry, author of the article. When we heard this story, I talked privately to a number of Japanese journalists, some of them senior, and they had all heard about it, he says. It didn't come as a surprise to any of them, but none of them would have dreamt of printing it. They could only do that because we had. Actually, the Japanese press may have something of a guilty conscience over their coverage of Masako. When the princess became pregnant in 1999, the media provided enthusiastic and relentless coverage. Masako suffered a miscarriage, and the Imperial Household Agency had harsh criticism for the press. The press club system, or Kisha club system, often described as media cartels that deny official information to non-members, also discourages Imperial Household reporters from rocking the boat. As independent UK correspondent David McNeil pointed out in an article for the Japan Focus website, press club members just don't ask the questions their interviewees won't want to hear. Not one reporter ever asked Emperor Hirohito about his responsibility for the war in Asia, potentially one of the greatest stories of the last half century. What are the chances of the press opening a real debate on the imperial household? That may depend on the depth of the present crisis. On the surface, it looks like Masako's plight has been a PR catastrophe for the imperial household. Naoki Inose, a writer and media commentator, says that the imperial household's standing was already weakened before the present crisis. Quote, "What is certain is that the imperial family's deepest cultural and psychological role has become diluted since the Pacific War. He believes that the bureaucrats of the Imperial Household Agency made a serious mistake by forcing Masako into a conservative role. At the time of her marriage to Naruhito, Masako was seen as a figure to whom modern Japanese women could relate. An intelligent and internationally minded working woman, she was the imperial family's chance to renew itself for the times. Reportedly, Masako turned down the prince several times before she was being persuaded that she could continue her diplomatic work as a member of the imperial family. But not everyone agrees that the imperial institution has actually been weakened. Asano suggests that the strength of taboos concerning reporting of the imperial family is evidence of the system's strength. Many Japanese intellectuals and journalists say that the imperial system is getting weaker, that it is in crisis, he says. I don't think so at all. Sometimes he jokingly tells students who think the imperial household has no connection with modern Japanese society that they should start a demonstration outside the old palace in Kyoto, then wait to see what kind of reaction they get from the police. It's not easy to gauge Japanese affection for individual imperials or for the institution, not least because no newspaper would dare to measure unpopularity. All the same, most commentators seem to agree that interest has been declining quite steadily since the end of the Pacific War, which is a term Japanese use to refer to World War II. The public's apparent indifference might be a reflection of the isolated lives of the imperial family. They are entirely supported by the state and have no assets of their own. They seem to live in a suffocatingly small social world. As Lloyd Perry of the London Times puts it, quote, they carry all the burdens of royalty without any of the perks. They also have far fewer opportunities to be involved with charitable work other than royal families. The website of Prince Charles, the heir to the UK throne, states that the prince is president or patron of 363 charities. The Japanese prince's site lists just one permanent post, the Japanese Red Cross. Several commentators have described the prince's recent outburst to the media as, quote, a second declaration of humanity, comparing it to his grandfather's renunciation of divinity after the close of World War II. Now, few Japanese today consider the emperor to be a god, but it's possible that a few members of the public or media relate to the imperial family as human beings either. As Jun Kame comments, quote, I think the crown prince was probably saying, I'm a human. My wife is a human too. Now, the last note is this story was modified on September 24th, 2004. So, when we're going over this case where the journalist was Yasunori Okadome, when he was visited by two members of a right-wing organization and smashed in the head with a glass ashtray and stabbed a few times, what did he do exactly? To be clear, he was guilty of failing to use an honorific for Masako, who's currently the empress. He probably said Masako-san. He didn't use the elevated honorific for Sama. And that was the crime. They tried to kill him. If you noticed, I referred to Emperor Hirohito, and I have referred to him in conversation as simply Hirohito. And I had an incident. Well, thank God it wasn't a right-wing extremist, but this woman, she was along the lines. She was very proud that her father had served in the Imperial Guards in World War II, and she and her husband were friends of their classmates, were working for the Imperial Household Agency, and they were friends with the granddaughter of Hideki Tojo. So when I had said something to the effect of Hirohito, she was outraged, and she goes, like, "What don't you mean?" And I think maybe what was the term at the time, Showa Tenno or whatever. Um, and I was just kind of taken back. I said, "No, I mean Hirohito." So there's a rule. It was kind of like Harry Potter. You can't say Voldemort. You have to say, he who has no name. And so, yeah, way before my time, Max kind of felt like Harry Potter, going, I'm going to say Voldemort. I'm going to say Hirohito. I'm not going to say, the Emperor of Peace. That's what Showa. It's ridiculous. Um, but there's some people who feel very, very passionate about that. Now, you can imagine, what if you were talking, and the press does, talking currently about King Charles? What if we say Charles, and somebody, maybe he's one of these weird right-wing orange organization fellows, and he goes, "How dare you? You have to say His Royal Highness King Charles." And maybe if he was British, he wouldn't stab you. He would glass you, with a mug or something like that. But that's how ridiculous it would be. So this is, as I indicated, there is no, in the Penal Code of Japan, there is no lèse-majesté, but there is that kind of sentiment, as others have indicated, that it exists. In fact, I think if you polled many Japanese young people and asked them um, whether they thought off the top of their head whether lèse-majesté in Japan was a criminal act, I think a double-digit percentage would say yes. And I think another double-digit percentage probably say, well, if it isn't against the law, it should be. And yeah, that's kind of scary. But anyways, that is the end of this discussion on lèse-majesté. Yeah. Have a good day. If you like this, please indicate a like, subscribe. If you have any requests, this one was one of the few ones that was not written by Robert Whiting. But if you have any requests, let me know. I think I'll be covering other topics, mostly post-war. I think I'm going to go live with Salvador Dali, maybe on the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was December 8th at 8 a.m. in Japan. No, it wasn't. It was in the afternoon. Anyways, it was in the morning of December 7th, 1941. So we're going to have maybe a discussion on post-war history in Japan. And I can't remember the exact time, but we're going to do that live. Anyways, that's all. Have a good day.